He grimaced as he raised his shaking hand to wipe the sweat off his forehead. He needed to go back to his job. He held the axe with both hands and took a step back. He couldn't just sit there and let this happen to his whole farm. He groaned and clenched his teeth before swinging at the tree. But when he saw what was peeking out of the tree trunk, his heart almost stopped. Lucas Brown really cared about two things in this world. His wife, Deborah, and their three kids, Brian, Shelley, and Kenny, made up his family. The second was Lucas's farm, where he had spent a lot of time, money, and sweat. For the Brown family, the farm was more than just a ranchette. It was how they made their living. So Lucas was upset when he saw that his land was slowly dying. The Browns raised birch, pine, and spruce trees, which sold well in their local market. Lucas loved the fact that his family started planting apple and maple trees. Even though the whole Brown farm was a beautiful place with tall trees that swayed in the wind and dark, rich soil, the most beautiful thing about it was a tall, beautiful oak tree in the middle. But the Browns had no idea that it would be the source of all their problems. Lucas always started his day on the farm by driving down to check on his trees. He would look at everything, from how acidic the soil was to how the trees looked and how healthy they were. He woke up early with his youngest son, Kenny, and they started their regular checkup. But that morning wouldn't be like any other. The burning smell in the air that morning was the first thing that made Lucas mad. He was used to the smell of fresh leaves, tree bark, and wet soil. Today, the smell had a hint of something unpleasant. Lucas said to Kenny, "I think we should keep going on foot." Given how big the farm was, they never walked around it on foot, but something was wrong today. What did they need to know? As Lucas and Kenny got closer to the center of the farm, the smell got worse. The trees around here were also a little less dark green than they usually are. Kenny, who is an agriculture major at the university, said, "Dad, something doesn't seem right." He said, "Look at those leaves," and Lucas's eyes popped up. The things he saw made him back up. Lucas was shocked by what he was seeing. A huge group of gray caterpillars were sitting on the many leaves above them. Lucas cursed to himself and looked around at the trees. He said, "They're everywhere." Kenny called out as he looked at the middle of the farm, "They're also spreading out. I think I understand what they mean." Lucas called a botanist in their area to help with the caterpillar problem. But he couldn't figure out where the smell was coming from. Kenny called out, "Dad," which brought Lucas back to the present. Kenny said, "There," and Lucas ran over. The big white oak stood in the middle of the farm, but Lucas couldn't say what it was doing. Out of the many cracks in the tree's bark came a gray liquid. Pests ate its leaves, and spider web-like silks grew in their place. "Grab my axe," choked Lucas, fighting the overwhelming urge to throw. Kenny ran to their truck, got the axe, and gave it to them quickly. He seemed to notice that his dad was having trouble deciding whether or not to cut down the prize tree. When he said that, Lucas started to cry. Kenny said, "I think she's already gone, Dad." Even though Lucas tried his best, the tree had been slowly dying over the past year. The family had owned the white oak for many years. Before Larry moved upstate, it had been there the whole time Lucas and his brother were growing up. Lucas moved his fingers around his axe and thought about whether or not he could swing it. "It's okay, Dad," said his son to make him feel better. "This is where the caterpillars' nests were. We might lose the farm if we don't cut her down now." Lucas told him to move back and then let the axe go. The cut leaked a thick gray liquid. The smell was too bad to stand. He took the handkerchief Kenny gave him and tied it around his face. He took a few swings and made a lot of progress. Then he realized it. As the axe blade went deep into the tree's trunk, the tree shook. Lucas took it out and hit it again. More smelly liquid came out, making the awful smell even worse. Lucas moved back, and Kenny got closer to see what was going on. "What is that?" he asked, shocked by the dirty white blob stuck in the slime. Lucas poked it with his axe as it moved through the thick liquid. An old memory came back to him. Lucas and his brother Larry played on these lands for years when they were kids, long before Lucas turned them into a farm. The boys' favorite sport was golf, and they liked to practice their swing by hitting balls at this tree. Someone had lost a golf ball in this area once. Lucas didn't see it ever again. Again, the smell made his eyes water, but this time it wasn't because of the smell. Lucas and his brother Larry used to come here every summer. Their favorite game had turned into a competition between them. There was one time when both teams had 19 hits. The next hit would decide the winner. Their match had become such a famous one. Using one of their regular balls seemed almost boring. The special ball came back to Larry at that time. Thomas Brown, the grandfather of Lucas and Larry Brown, was at the 1966 Masters tournament when legendary golfer Jack Nicklaus won. Niklaus had signed the ball and given it to him. It was like a family heirloom because it was one of the balls Niklaus had used in the tournament. Since the ball had been given to the boy's dad by their grandfather, it had always been special to them. Using the ball had been a bad decision. Lucas was surprised when he won the game, but couldn't find the ball anywhere. The ball was one of the things their grandfather had saved. They had argued about who was to blame. Lucas, because his last hit lost the ball, or Larry, because he talked Lucas into using that ball for the last shot. Both boys were broken that day, no matter what. As Lucas looked at the wall of slime still dripping down the trunk's hollow space, it was clear. Even though the liquid was a murky gray color, he could still see the faint lines of the signature on the ball. It looked like the liquid had not only kept the ball hidden all these years, but it had also kept it in good shape. With Kenny's help, the two of them used gloves to carefully dig the ball out of its soggy grave. Lucas sprayed off as much of the sticky liquid as he could with a spray bottle and then dried off the rest. He was surprised to see that the ball was still in pretty good shape. Even though it has some small stains now, it's clear that a permanent marker was used to write the signature. Even though the signature was a little worn, it was still exactly how Lucas remembered it. Lucas had given up hope of getting the special ball back a long time ago. He had one tear running down his left eye, and he wished his dad and grandfather could have seen it one last time. The smell of the liquid got stronger and woke him up from his dream. The hole cut into the trunk didn't seem to like being out in the weather. Still, there was work to be done. Laura Peltzer, the botanist, did show up in the end. She told the Browns that they should spray the farm as soon as possible to lessen the damage caused by the caterpillars. She also wanted the farm to be quarantined so that it wouldn't spread to other farms nearby. Laura said that the strange liquid was probably water because the tree had become hollow over the years. But that wasn't what was strange. The harsh changes in weather over the years had made the inside of the tree a place where bacteria thrived. Since there were millions of microorganisms inside the tree, they had started to change its structure from the inside out. Because water was collecting on the inside and bacteria were making chemical gases, it was likely that a special type of tree bacteria called slime flux was to blame. Laura looked at the strange substance carefully for hours. After putting some of it into test tubes for more testing in the lab, she finally put away her tools. She promised to make sure that the quarantine didn't hurt Brown's farming too much. Still, Lucas wasn't sure about one thing. When he was getting ready to ask Laura, he was almost afraid of what she would say. Lucas Brown was always proud of where he came from. After years of research, he found out that the Brown family had owned the land where the family farm was built for 6 generations. It was one of the oldest pieces of land in the state. Lucas had seen pictures of his ancestors from the last 4 generations. In spite of all the changes that the photos showed over the years, one thing was always the same. The huge oak tree had stood strong on the property for a long time. It had outlived every generation before it and still stood tall, like a sentinel watching over the land. The pictures showed how it was used by each generation that lived here. As a swing, a place to have a picnic, a place to take family pictures, and, in the case of Lucas and Larry, as a golf target. Now, it looked like its time was up. Lucas saw that the tree probably needed to be cut down because it seemed to be where the caterpillars were coming from. They had already done so much damage to its trunk. It was sad to see that the huge tree looked so hurt. Even the roots looked like they had been through a lot. When Lucas asked Laura about the tree, he thought the worst, but her answer surprised him. Laura gave the tree a lot of thought and looked at the ground around it more than once. She turned to Lucas and Kenny after what seemed like an eternity. "We can still save it if you follow my rules to the letter afterward," she told them. Lucas was so happy that he couldn't stand it, and Kenny was just as happy about the news. It was possible, but it would take some work. Lucas couldn't do anything else for now. After all the drama of the day, the way it ended made him smile from ear to ear. He could finally focus on the special ball again. The ball was carefully cleaned with the help of Kenny and Laura's advice about which chemicals to use. Kenny was excited to hear about its history, and he knew there was only one more thing to do. Lucas called Larry, who was his brother. He told him about what they had found, and they laughed about when they were kids. Lucas was so happy that the tree brought him back to a part of his childhood. Since the ball was left for both him and Larry, Lucas was afraid that they would fight again about who should keep it. As he asked Larry what he thought, he was afraid of what Larry would say. Lucas was happy to see that Larry didn't start a new fight over the ball by stepping aside. Since Larry had never been married or had kids, he thought Lucas should keep the ball. Larry said, "One day, you'll be able to give it to your sons, too." It had been decided that the ball would stay, but Larry still wanted one thing. Larry agreed to give up his right to the ball if Lucas promised that it would never again be used to practice golf shots. Lucas had never been happier about his family and background. As he looked out the window of the ranch, the large property seemed even more beautiful today, with the oak tree gently swaying in the breeze. Lucas hoped that it would live on and bring the same joy to the next generation of Browns.